Welcome to Part 3 of Chapter 11, The Functional Organization of Nervous Tissue. In this presentation, we will cover graded potentials and action potentials. Let's begin with graded potentials. Graded potentials are small changes in the membrane potential in a localized area. They occur in dendrites and in some soma. The image of the neuron on the right shows the area that graded potentials are found in as blue. Graded potentials can also be hyperpolarizing or depolarizing. GPs result from ligands binding to receptors, mechanical stimulations, and temperature changes. Here we see how depolarizing and hyperpolarizing graded potentials are created by mechanically gated and ligand-gated channels. The top image depicts depolarization in response to a mechanically gated channel. Pressure is applied and a mechanically gated channel opens. Calcium and sodium cations enter the cell, resulting in a depolarizing graded potential. The middle image shows a ligand-gated channel opening when acetylcholine attaches to it. The depolarizing graded potential is due to more calcium and sodium entering the cell than potassium leaving the cell. The bottom image shows a hyperpolarizing graded potential at a ligand-gated channel. Here, the neurotransmitter glycine attaches to the ligand-gated channel. Glycine acts as the ligand. It opens and allows chloride anions to enter the neuron, making it more negative and thus hyperpolarizing the membrane. The amplitude of graded potentials are proportional to the stimulus strength. Graded potential strength is determined by the number of ion gates that are opened and closed and how long the gates are opened. Both of these factors alter the number of ions that can cross the membrane. The image on the right shows 3 different stimuli and the size of depolarization that each causes. As the stimulus strength increases from stimulus 1 to stimulus 2 and then 3, the depolarization size also increases. Another important fact is that graded potentials degrade over distance. This characteristic comes into play a bit later in our discussion. Graded potentials also exhibit summation. GPs can be added together to create a larger amplitude. The graph on the slide shows 2 stimuli being added together, resulting in a larger amplitude. Graded potentials from all of the dendrites are added together in the soma. The graded potentials can be depolarizing or hyperpolarizing. The top picture shows how each of the dendrites are sending graded potentials towards the soma. If, when they are all added together in the soma, the result is a depolarizing of the membrane to the threshold value, an action potential will be initiated along the axon. The top picture shows how at the axon hillock, that is where the action potential is generated, and the bottom image illustrates how the graded potential must reach the threshold in order for the action potential to occur. Let's now continue by learning about action potentials. Action potentials are a sequence of rapidly occurring events resulting in changes in the neuron's membrane potential. They are also known as nerve impulses. Action potentials are the way that neurons communicate. Action potentials are due to voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels opening and closing along the axon. Action potentials only happen if the graded potentials depolarize the cell membrane to the threshold value. Action potentials follow an all or none principle. Regardless of the stimulus strength, as long as the threshold is met, the action potential will occur from start to finish in the same manner every time. There are 4 phases of action potentials: depolarization, repolarization, hyperpolarization, and the return to resting membrane potential. Let's now go through what happens in each step. When the neuron is at rest and exhibiting resting membrane potential, the inside of the neuron is negatively charged compared to the outside. The resting membrane potential of a neuron is negative 70 millivolts. Voltage-gated sodium channels, shown in red, have 2 gates: an inactivation gate and an activation gate. At rest, the voltage-gated sodium channels have their activation gates closed and the inactivation gates open. Voltage-gated potassium channels in purple have only 1 gate and it is closed. Depolarization begins at the axon hillock when threshold is reached by the graded potential. Sodium activation gates open and sodium diffuses into the cell. Potassium channels begin to open. These open very slowly, so more sodium enters the cell than potassium leaves. The influx of sodium ions cause depolarization, resulting in more voltage-gated sodium channels to open, causing more depolarization, and then more channels open. This is an example of a positive feedback system. This continues until most voltage-gated sodium channels are open. The second phase of an active action potential is repolarization. As the membrane potential reaches its maximum depolarization, the inactivation gates of voltage-gated sodium channels close, and additional potassium channels open. Sodium influx stops, and potassium movement out of the cell increases. This causes repolarization. The third phase of an action potential is hyperpolarization. At approximately negative 70 millivolts, sodium activation gates close and sodium inactivation gates open. This reestablishes the resting condition for sodium channels. Potassium gates slowly close, allowing extra potassium to leave the cell, resulting in hyperpolarization. The final phase of an action potential is the return to resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential is reestablished after voltage-gated potassium channels close. The sodium-potassium pump accomplishes putting the ions back to where they belong. Refractory periods are the times after an action potential occurs that an area on the plasma membrane is less sensitive to another action potential. During an absolute refractory period, the area is completely insensitive to another stimulus, so there is no way another action potential can be generated. The absolute refractory period is during depolarization and repolarization phases. The image shows the absolute refractory period in purple. The relative refractory period is the time when only a very strong stimulus can cause another action potential. This time is shown in pink in the graph. The relative refractory period occurs during the hyperpolarization phase. In this presentation, we covered graded potentials and action potentials.